that it would happen, we decided not to dwell on the idea because dwelling would only make us sad and miserable. Nehemiah has a deep longing, a desire burning in his heart, and he can't help but dwell on it. When friends and relatives come back from the homeland, Nehemiah asks them to tell him all about Jerusalem, the place he longs to see restored, and their report is less than positive. Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, "And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire." As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Today we start a 3-part series on the book of Nehemiah. And today we will speed through the first 6 chapters of the book. And we see a pattern emerge. Nehemiah has a reflex response of prayer. So here in the opening introductory verses, as we hear the heartbreaking tale of Jerusalem, what do you think Nehemiah does? Nehemiah responds to his heartbreak with prayer. And much of the first chapter, verses 5 through 11, is Nehemiah's prayer. It is not a prayer for self. It is not a prayer of asking. Instead, it is a prayer of confession and of calling on God to remember his promises and his reputation. Then, almost as an aside, the last part of the last verse, something not nearly as important as the prayer seemingly, we read, "Now I was the cupbearer to the king." The Andrews Study Bible notes that Nehemiah was the cupbearer of the Persian king, and as such, he had direct access to the king and exerted a significant influence. In the same passage, the study notes observe just a few notes later that Nehemiah probably came from a humble background. Being cupbearer is impressive. He has worked his way up. He is a powerful man with influence and direct access to the king. Yet, in this context, his position is an aside. It is not the point. Nehemiah's longing for Jerusalem, for God's good name, matters more. After longing for a treehouse for forever, the opportunity presented itself. We were moving, and we were talking about what we would miss about our house. The only house that my brother or I remembered living in, and someone brought up the tree by the patio. The perfect treehouse tree, waiting. This was the moment. Make the ask. After longing for Jerusalem's rebuilding for forever, working his way up, praying hard, reminding God of his promises, the opportunity presents itself. Nehemiah chapter 2. Would you read the bold print on the screen with me? "I took up the wine and gave it to the king." He's the cupbearer, remember? "Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, 'Why is your face sad, seeing as you are not sick?' This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid." The king recognizes that he is sad of heart, that he's not sick. He knows Nehemiah well, but Nehemiah is afraid. But he can't be afraid because this is the moment. It's his chance to make the ask. Verse 3, I said to the king, read with me, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, then you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. Nehemiah has a reflex of prayer. In the face of despair, Nehemiah prays. In the face of fear, he sends up a quick prayer. And when presented with an opportunity, he prays and he asks. And once the ask is made, the wheels start turning. Dad scratches his chin and looks at the pile of scrap lumber slotted to be taken to the dump. Maybe. The king turns to the queen and asks Nehemiah some questions, and Nehemiah not only answers, he ups the ante. He increases his ask. Don't just let me go. Don't just send me. Send me and give me letters of recommendation. Give me lumber so I can build myself a house there. Give me troops for the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls and temple. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 8, and the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of God was upon me. Once again, we see Nehemiah's character. It is not just that I am good buddies with the king, so he gave me what I asked for. It is God's good hand upon me. Nehemiah has prayed, he has confessed, he has reminded, he has asked, and now he has received. After years of waiting and hoping and making plans, the moment is here. It's happening. There are nails going into the tree. And for the next 3 days, my brother and I revel in the glory of a few rickety steps, a small platform with a rail. We fill 2 makeshift shelves with acorn caps and polished stones, showing it off to every visitor who comes to bid our family farewell, insisting they climb up and see our treehouse. It is a good 3 days. After years of waiting and hoping and making plans for it, the moment is here. It is happening. Nehemiah is on his way. All of his requests have been granted. Timber is loaded, letters of recommendation in hand, army officers and horsemen trailing. The long, hot travel seems to take no time because the journey, this thing that he has pinned his hopes and dreams upon, it is happening. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, and I and a few men with me, and I told no one what God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. Once again, Nehemiah says, this isn't my plan. I'm not acting under my own power. It is what God had put into my heart. Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king, has arrived with a retinue. For 3 days he nods and smiles and attends the formal dinners with dignitaries. He sees the polished, presentable facade of the king's Jerusalem. The Jerusalem that those have been waiting, the tenants are showing the friend of the king, their conquering king. And after 3 inglorious days, Nehemiah has had enough. He's not here to enjoy polished stones or see what others want to show off. He has something else in mind. So in the night, he sneaks out. He tours the city, seeing the broken walls, the burned gates, the rubble piles so treacherous that he must dismount and go on foot. And it's only after this tour, after taking stock of just how bad it really is, that Nehemiah shows his hand. Once again, I ask you to read the bold print with me. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. God is at the center of this work. Nehemiah, friend of the king, powerful man in the conquering empire, identifies with Jerusalem. We are in trouble. The people are excited. Let us rise up and build. God has prepared it. Nehemiah has prayed boldly and asked bravely, and we, the reader, are primed for a happy ending. The people work hard. They have committed themselves to the Lord, and they lived happily ever after. At the end of 3 glorious days of inhabiting the awaited, beloved, fabulous, very small treehouse platform, we help tear it down. We were moving, so its deconstruction was inevitable. And we could have chosen to focus on that. When visitors came, we could have said, we only get our treehouse for 3 days. Isn't that sad? But instead, we enjoyed it to the fullest, seeing the moments of treehouse bliss as our short-lived, happily ever after. Nehemiah has many moments of happily ever after. But there's also trouble. The people commit themselves. They start on the work. We're doing the thing that God has placed on our heart happily ever after until trouble arises. As we've read through the chapters, we have seen the foreshadowing, mentions of those living around Jerusalem who aren't so happy about Nehemiah's letters of recommendation. But now it turns nasty. They start spreading lies saying Nehemiah is rebelling against the king. They begin vigorously working against Nehemiah. But it's not all bad news. Chapter 3 tells us about all the people who begin work to make this dream a reality. He names the families and the people off one by one, cataloging which section of the wall each family, clan, or individual adopts and repairs or rebuilds. We're so excited about this turn of event that by chapter 4, we are encouraged the wall is making progress. We've almost forgotten the slander at the end of chapter 2. But then, now, when Sanballat had heard we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. Join me. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that?" Nehemiah hears the taunts. He could engage. He could step into the trap. He could say, "That's not the case. I'm the best friend of the king. We've got his backing. Look at what we're doing. Our God is stronger, but he doesn't. Instead, he prays. With prayer and hard work, the wall is halfway done. And we are encouraged. But the defamers hear, and they aren't happy. There's another trap. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Nehemiah obviously believes in the power of prayer. When trouble comes, prayer is his first reflex. It is his first response. But Nehemiah also sets a guard. They continue building the wall from first light till star rise. They work. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon in the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. You see, inventive problems, inventive snags, call for innovative solutions. Middle Island in Australia has long hosted a population of little penguins. They're not just small, that is the name of the type of penguin, the little penguin. Protected due to the island's topography, in 1991, a new natural causeway began forming, connecting Middle Island to the mainland and introducing foxes. Between 1999 and 2005, the population of the adorable 13-inch, 3-pound birds fell from 600 to 10. What could they do? Should they fill in the causeway? Should they hunt the foxes, trap the foxes, relocate them, build a fence, take all of the penguins to a zoo and enclose them? There are no good options. So, local chicken farmer Swampy Marsh, that is his real name, Swampy Marsh, suggests that his 100-pound Maremma guard dog named Oddball, who is trained to watch over his chicken flocks, might also be used to protect the little penguins. Results were immediate and sustained. The Maremma dog's mere presence was enough to stave fox predation. It has continued with other dogs, and today there are over 100 little penguins on the island. It is an inventive solution. The penguins don't have to change anything. They are not restricted to a cage. They are not enclosed in a fence. They live their life with a doggy companion close by. Jerusalem's wall continues to be rebuilt. There is much prayer. There is confidence in God. And there is the setting of a guard. At every turn, Nehemiah faces the problem. Jerusalem is in ruins in chapter 1, and how does he respond? Prayer and asking big. There is a need for workers and partners. He can't do it all alone. Prayer and group effort. Commitment to group effort. Chapter 3, it's really bad, and the wall is a big project. Prayer and personal responsibility. Every family chooses a section of the wall, usually right by where they live, and they take responsibility for that. Chapter 4, there is trouble from without. The slanderers, the troublemakers are causing problems. They're going to attack prayer, and we set a guard. And so we come to chapter 5, trouble from within. In chapter 5, the trouble comes not from distance or the past or enemies. It comes from within the community. It comes from within God's own people. Nehemiah has a dream. A dream that Jerusalem would be a shining example of what it means to follow God, what it means to be a son or daughter of Israel. He has a dream that it would be the content of their character that makes them known. That it would be their prayer and their God and their kindness and their cohesiveness that makes others want to come to Jerusalem. He wants them to live in harmony and prosperity, to build not just the walls but each other. But in chapter 5, Nehemiah discovers that the people are drowning in debt, in interest, that they are hungry, that they are going without, and that the officials, the leaders of their own people, are taking advantage of them, becoming rich at the expense of God's vision. It's easy to deconstruct things. It's easy to look at something and point out the flaws. It is harder to build something. We can deconstruct things with neglect. This is what the officials in Jerusalem are doing. They are neglecting to change their ways for the vision. They say they want to make a difference. They want to live life a different way, but they are unwilling to do anything differently personally. And so the vision is crumbling. It is deconstructing for neglect. Another way to deconstruct things is to actively pull them apart, to work against the vision. You guys know that I like to watch cooking shows on TV. And there is this trend of deconstructed food dishes. And I feel like it's something you can only get away with on a cooking show or at a very, very fancy restaurant. If you Google deconstructed food, this is what it comes up with. It is a trend characterized by the separation of ingredients in a dish, with each component presented on its own. Now, if you Google this, you will come up with a number of disgruntled restaurateurs who show up and are served a dish like these. A sausage sandwich, a lemon meringue pie, and a piece of avocado toast. I don't know about you, but I have a problem paying for something and then having to do the work myself of making the dish. If I wanted to make my own food, I would have stayed home, y'all. Though I do think that this makes bringing something to potluck significantly easier. It is always easier to tear down than it is to build up. It is easier to find the flaw. And the officials, through their actions, are deconstructing the vision of what Jerusalem can and should be. That is the exact opposite of what Nehemiah is trying to do. He is trying to instill a vision of who God's people can be. He is trying to build something. Nehemiah finds out what is going on, and he responds. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies? It's not good, guys. What you're doing, it's not just affecting our people here, and that's bad enough. It is affecting God's reputation among our enemies. This can't go on. So Nehemiah and his friends lend the people money and grain without interest, and he calls for commitment to reform. He basically bullies the leaders into changing. The people promise to do better. The leaders promise to do better. Nehemiah responds to the trouble from within God's people with generosity and with prayer. There is more trouble ahead. Nehemiah avoids falling into the trap sent by slanderer Sanballat. He sidesteps another trap where they're trying to call him out and get him outside of Jerusalem. Nehemiah refuses to run away. And finally, in Nehemiah chapter 6, read with me. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. At Tabernacle, we have faced some challenges in recent years. This story of Nehemiah is only 52 days long. That is a lot of problems to face in 2 months. Sometimes I wonder if problems are better when they are compressed in time, or if you have a moment to breathe before the next one comes along. At Tabernacle, it seems like every time we thought we could relax and breathe a sigh of relief, another big problem, a problem we didn't have control over, reared its ugly head. We are spending the next several weeks with Nehemiah, journeying through the chapters in chronological order and seeing what it looks like to choose not to deconstruct, but instead to choose to build something together. There are challenges, there are pitfalls, joys and triumphs, and there is a lot of prayer. I believe that Nehemiah is the model we need, not just in our church family, though that is true, but in our world today. Nehemiah is someone who catches a vision that God lays on his heart, and he walks through the doors God opens. He invests his time and energy and personal money in the task that God has put in front of him. And Nehemiah is unique among the prophets of the Old Testament because there are no big, flashy miracles. There are no visions or voices from heaven. It is just Nehemiah facing the challenges at hand, praying hard, working hard, and following God as best he knows how. Like our special music said this morning, he comes to God and says, just as I am. I am willing, put me in, coach. In a world that thrives on tearing down, on upending and deconstructing, Nehemiah stubbornly stands up and says, we're going to build something. In our world, a world that often seems to thrive on disparaging and deconstructing and dismantling, using words, as we talked about in our Sabbath school class this morning, and deeds, we have some options. We can stand by the proverbial pile of scrap lumber and shrug our shoulders. Or we can look at the tree, we can see the potential, and we can start to build. Our mission at Tabernacle is found on the inside of our bulletin. It is not just words. It is something that we strive to embody and live by. It is something we strive to measure ourselves and our ministries against. Our mission is to focus on our journey, on growing together in that journey as we love Jesus, as we serve like Jesus, and as we follow his word. There's a lot packed into that short statement. But as we think about what we do, potlucks and food pantry and clothes closet and blood drive and lending our space and partnering with other nonprofits, as we think about what we do and the plans we make, it's not just stuff. It is steps towards building something. Next week, a week from tomorrow, we have the Barber Bash. It's something that we are working on building. We are working on building community, not just in our church family, but with those outside our gates. We are working on opening our doors to those who might not know who we are or who might have heard bad things and say, here we are God's people. Come into Jerusalem and let us be your friends. All of these things, small groups and Creation Sabbath and Sabbath school and socials and everything we have planned on our church calendar, it is all working towards building something. These items are our wall, our statement to the forces of evil that we are here and we are ready to pray. We are ready to pray and ask big. We are ready to pray and give great group effort. We are ready to pray and take on personal responsibility. We are ready to pray and set a guard if need be, and we are ready to pray and give generously of our time, of our resources. We are ready to follow Nehemiah's example, to see that prayer is part of the solution, but there's more. It is prayer and. We are ready to pray wide and deep and hard, to pray and. And when it is done, let us say with Nehemiah, let us rise up and build. For, read it with me, they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Bow your heads with me. God, we need your help. If we are to live up to this idea that our journey with you is to love Jesus, to serve like Jesus, and to follow your word, we have a lot of praying to do. We have a lot of and to do. Lord, as we think about Nehemiah as a model for tabernacle, we pray that you would surround us, that you would uphold us, that we might pray and build something. Amen.